All right, PropStat students, this video is just to give you some pointers about how to do your March Madness project. So you will notice in Google Classroom that I posted Project 6 March Madness right here. And there's a sample project right here. So some people like to follow along the sample project. Some people like to follow along the rubric. If you do choose to follow the sample project, then make sure you also check your work with the rubric, because the sample is just a student sample. It might not include everything on the rubric. All right, so let's look at the student sample. It starts with a cover slide, and you should also have a cover slide with the name of your project and your name on it. And then you need to do a little research about the history of the NCAA tournament. You need 3 sentences in your own words. Then you want to talk about a run. And for the run, you need to tell the probability that this run happened, which is not something that I am seeing in this here. So let's see what they said. They were talking about Loyola Chicago, 11 seed that made it to the Final Four. So if the 11 seed made it to the Final Four, that means they won the round of 64, the round of 32, they won the Sweet 16, and they won the Elite 8 game that they played. So they won 4 games. And if we simplify this problem to say that the probability of winning each game is 1/2, then for Loyola Chicago, we would say that the probability of winning 4 games in a row is 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2, which is 1/32. So this is the kind of math that you'll need to be doing on the slide with the runs. Okay, then you need to find 6 basic probabilities. In Mrs. Burrell's class, we collected data as a class so that we would have some data to work with. And so I'll show you my 6th period sheet, but if you're in my 8th period, you're on a different sheet. And you're going to be finding the probability out of all 64 teams. Okay, and so most of you contributed to this sheet, but even if you did not complete that assignment to contribute to the sheet, you can still use this information. So you're going to find 6 variables, and I only requested that you don't use the first 6 because if you did, you might have a similar problem to everybody else, and I want your project to look unique. So it's fine if you wanted to use from Texas, Virginia, and California, but maybe then you skipped over blue and green colors. You decided to do public, college, Big 12, what was this one over here? Southeastern, okay? Whatever you decided to do. So you're choosing 6 variables, and you're just looking to see how many yeses they have out of 64. Remember that 2 different people collected the data, so you need to do all 64 schools, count how many yeses you have, and the probability that a school in the round of 64 is from Texas would be the number of yeses divided by 64. So let's go back to the sample project. Notice that they define each event with a letter, and they just went with A, B, C, D, E, F, but you can use a different letter if you want. Like for Virginia, you might want to say V equals Virginia. So A is the teams with M in their name, and the probability of A is going to be the number of teams that had M in their name out of 64. And notice that they have decorated their slides with some schools that were in the round of 64. You can decorate your slides differently if you want, but it is nice to make it attractive. Okay. So a lot of my students have gotten that far, and now you're working on compound probabilities. For the compound probabilities, we're using the round of 32. So the first thing we have to do is figure out, how am I going to find the probabilities of things in the round of 32? Well, the first thing you need to do is see which teams made it to the round of 32, and those would be these teams here. Now, if you're using the women's bracket, it looks different, but it's set up exactly the same way. These are the teams that won their first round, and they are in the round of 32. So here is a suggestion. I suggest you go to our whole class data and you make your own copy so you don't mess up ours. And you can name it something with your name. All right, and then what we're going to do is these are matched up. So it was Gonzaga versus Norfolk State, and it was Oklahoma versus Missouri. So when I go back here, I can see Gonzaga won, Oklahoma won. That means the other two lost, so I could delete those. And if you right-click on the row, you can delete it. And then Oklahoma won versus Missouri. Okay, so now I have kept all of the schools that moved to the round of 32 that won their first game, and I deleted the others. So now I only have 32 schools here. And now I'll be able to count the variables I want to use. So let's go back to the sample project. So they decided to use blue on logo and from Texas. And you'll choose any two that you want to use. They could be the same two that you used in the first round, or they could be different, but the probabilities will be different regardless because we're using a different group of schools this time. So then you want to create a Venn diagram, and you create the Venn diagram using the shapes. When you create a shape, like you'll create a rectangle for the outside of your Venn diagram, you can change the color to transparent, and that way you'll be able to see through it. You'll see the circles overlap that way. And then remember just to create text boxes to show the numbers. So you will have schools that have one variable, schools that have the other variable, and you'll have schools that have both. And then remember on the outside here, you need the number of schools that have neither of those two events. And then the way they set these up is very good. They tell you the probability of each individually. And remember, the probability of blue on logo was not just this number, it's actually all of these together, this and this. Then down here, they have the probability of A and B. That means they both have to happen, and that's going to be this number out of 32. And then this is the probability of A or B, which means the probability of this one, or both. So all of these numbers added up out of 32, and that's here. All right, so then you're going to be doing another compound probability. So you choose two different variables, and you go through the same process. And then one more. So you'll have 3 different slides for compound probability. All right, then moving on to advanced probabilities. For advanced probabilities, we're using the round of 16. So we have to go back to your bracket. Okay, this was the round of 64, this was the round of 32, and here's your Sweet 16. All of these, and then of course symmetric on the other side. All of these there should be 16 teams altogether. And so what I would do is go back to the copy you made of your spreadsheet, and I would start deleting the teams that didn't make it. So I would delete Oklahoma because Gonzaga won that game. I would delete Ohio because Creighton won that game. I would delete Kansas because USC won that game, etc. And then you should have 16 teams left. So make sure you're pausing the video as you are completing these steps. All right, so for the advanced probabilities, we are doing conditional probabilities. So they did the probability that the name contains an E and the probability that the team has orange in their logo. And they found these probabilities separately. They filled in their Venn diagram. And then over here, they're finding the probability of A given B. The probability the name contains an E given that the team has orange in their logo. So remember for that, you are only considering this part of the graph, not the whole 16. Only the part, in this case, of teams that have orange in their logo. So out of the teams that have orange in their logo, which is just 4 teams, how many of those teams have a name with an E? And that's these 3. So they had the probability that a team contains the letter E, given that they have orange in the logo, is 3 out of 4. This 3 out of this 4. And then they do another advanced probability with a different Venn diagram. And then they make some overall conclusions. So you're trying to make recommendations for people for next year based on your observation for this year. So for example, if you noticed that the number of teams that made it to the round of 32, for example, there were a high number of teams from Texas, you might say, I recommend that you choose teams from Texas in the first round because the probability of a team from Texas winning is this. These are the types of overall conclusions, and you can see the sample for some other things that they have chosen there. So please email me if you have any more questions on this, and please get working on this.